Welcome to another video on Out of the Park Baseball 23. Today we're going to look at some unheralded hidden gem prospects who you probably didn't find in any top 100 that you've read. I wanted to hit on some guys who, would be a little bit cheaper to get, hopefully, who aren't going to be the obvious trade candidates whenever you start a save. I've got one for each position, plus everyone's favorite, a bonus two-way player. But yeah, like any good list, this is going to be mostly arbitrary. I did go through the entire export of Major League Baseball and all the minor league affiliates and narrowed it down from there. But it's really based off of the philosophy that I've had in saves, which has, I think, served me well, especially over the last few years of the game engine, which is really looking for one of two types of prospects. Number one is prospects who excel at a single skill. Primarily, I'm looking at contact. That would be my number one target, just because it's the batting skill that raises the floor and the ceiling the most of any hitter. If you hit 300, you're going to at least be, decent enough, even if it's a pretty empty batting average. And of course, if you doubt how much batting average can raise the ceiling, go and play a sim with regular Joey Gallo, and then play one with him at 180 out of 250 contact in the editor, and then see exactly how much better he is. So it's definitely the one that I think makes the biggest difference for hitters. And then on the flip side, movement for pitchers, because in the last few versions of the game, the main determining factor for how good a pitcher could be, especially in the starting rotation, is how well you could minimize home runs. If you could do that, even if your control wasn't great or you weren't striking many guys out, you could make up for that with defense, and especially a good catcher and good defense up the middle after that, then you would be able to have a really strong pitcher. And if you got a rotation like that, a very strong team. So those are the two individual ratings I look for first and foremost. But I mean, any single skill that is high enough, especially for a given player's level and their age, that can still be valuable. So, power, eye, even gap power could be, less so gap power, but the other skills could make a big difference there. Because once you have that talent change randomness, which in Out of the Park Baseball, if it has a slightly different development and player rating development engine than a lot of games. In games like Football Manager, a player is generated with a set ability or set potential ability, and then you spend the rest of the game trying to train them and take the efforts to get them to reach that ability. Whereas in OOTP, you have talent change randomness, where a player, their ratings and their current ability and their potential ability can both fluctuate up and down based off of things like playing time or just random development. So if you can find a player who has one notable skill, their weaker ratings can be developed and can grow. And you may have someone, if they just have contact, they can get some plate discipline and become an excellent leadoff hitter, or they can develop a little bit more power and then become a middle of the order bat, and so on and so forth. So I often look for players who have one skill, and even if that's it, pick them up late in a draft or as a free agent, because with a little bit of luck can really turn out well from there. And then the flip side is actually the players who are very well rounded and average across the board. So the flip side of that logic is you get someone who is just okay at everything, and if they still especially are young and have a little bit more time to develop, you've got just that many more opportunities for them to, become elite at a single skill. And then you take, an average hitter, 50s across the board, give them 70 power, suddenly you've got a middle of the lineup hitter. So really it's either or. Players who are, just a little okay at, one or two things, rather than being good at just one. They can be valuable, but I just tend to find that one of those two extremes, either the jack of all trades or the master of the one. So that's really how I've approached draft and prospect development the last few years especially. So that's informed these choices a little bit. So with no further ado, I'll start with the first one at catcher, Yoel Pozo. So he is a catcher who not great defensively. So especially if you're a big fan of having that catcher ability. And in prior games, it was an absolute must. From what I've heard in the most recent game, it seems to be less of an impact, or you can, in a worst case scenario, you can always adjust it down to fit your preference. But as you can tell, he's got decent contact. For a catcher, honestly, pretty good contact, average power, and he just doesn't strike out. So he made his major league debut last year, but only played about a month in the big leagues. So you still have 6 full years of team control, 3 at the minimum. So definitely someone who is worth considering, especially if you platoon and you have a left-handed hitting catcher, or if you're just looking for another bat to come in and maybe give you your lineup a different look. So I would highly recommend him. And once again, if he gets just a little bit more power or a little bit more discipline, it's very easy to see him becoming a top-notch catcher. And at 24, going on 25, not too old to have that happen. Next up, at first base, we have Miguel Vargas from the Dodgers organization. As you can tell, at 22, he's very well-rounded, but especially has the potential in contact. And notably, too, he's pretty tall at 6'3". He's got decent infield range, so he can, get to a top-notch first base defensively. So he doesn't even need to fully fill out the hitting ratings to be, useful, especially since third base, you wouldn't want him to start, but he can definitely spell there and potentially even second. So with a little bit of luck too, getting up from 60 to 70 contact turns him from, a starter into an all-star just by itself, never mind any other development. So really, really highly rated prospect just from his starting ratings. And yeah, I think, even if you have like the scouting here that says he's 50 potential, I think practically speaking, he's on the higher end of that. So definitely look for that if you need some help in the first base position. My Cleveland Guardians say I'm trying to get him. No luck so far. Next up is Angelus, who is a second baseman playing in the Oakland organization. And if you look at him, he could actually, get some time at second or third, but really with the range and the average arm, he really is best suited for second. What excited me most about him was the 45 contact at 19 and 60 potential there. So he should be able to hold his own at high A or potentially even double A pretty soon, and has the potential to really add on from there. So definitely a second baseman who I will be looking at trying to acquire in any save I play. Next up at third base, a little bit different of a prospect where you've got Angelus, who's just 19. On the flip side, we have Michael Stefanik, who just turned 26 in game. And he has really good contact, doesn't strike out at all. He can play second or third, although he's not a really good defender at either one. But as you can tell based off of his real life stats from last year, he really did hit well in Salt Lake City. And because of that, his ratings reflect that he's a competent major league hitter based off of this. So really would be good. Has no service time, has all 3 option years left. So a little bit of a late bloomer in that regard, which means you have plenty of time to bring him up, get hit his prime years at the league minimum or early arbitration. And he can, like I said, spell second or third as needed. Plus, at 5'10", he would probably be a little short for first base, but he could play it as needed. So, could work as a corner guy, utility guy. Definitely someone who, if you can get him on the cheap, will make your organization better. At shortstop, we have Carlos Culminaris from the Tampa Bay organization, and of course, being Tampa Bay, of course they have great prospects. He was the one who intrigued me most because unlike someone like Angelus, who has good development in his batting ratings already, Culminaris is still mostly potential. However, of the starting shortstop prospects, he does have 65 infield range, which is on the high end of prospects. You generally don't see too many prospects, especially in the initial launch of the game, who are already in the minors, as opposed to someone who comes in and is randomly generated from the draft or international free agency. It's pretty rare to see an infield range above 65 in this phase. So as far as real life players, he's on the higher end for shortstop prospects. Has enough ability as a hitter where he could potentially make it as a utility guy or even as a second baseman. But if he can really stick around at shortstop, and hopefully you get more than this 55 potential here, then he could be a long-term member of your organization. In left field, I recommend Yohendrick Pinago, who, aside from having an 80 grade name, also has really high contact scores. At 19, is pretty developed both in contact and eye at 40. Not an excellent defender, but once again, we're talking left field. He would actually be above average on a lot of teams with the 55 range. And he can play around a little at other positions. He can fake it a little bit in center and can do all right in right, although his arm's a little underwhelming there. But yeah, really it's the contact. 55 avoid Ks at 19, turning 20 soon in game. Just looks really solid. And of course, as a lefty, you get the platoon advantage most of the time. So really high potential youngster there. Center field, I think, was one of the harder ones for me to find, but who I eventually settled on was Lorenzo Cedrola, who really fits that one skill sort of requirement. 60 contacts, 70 avoid Ks, that really drives it. Average to, I would say, fringe average as a major league center fielder with the 65 range, leading to about a 55 center field rating. He can definitely, spell there, even if he's not a top-notch defensive center fielder. The bat is decent enough that he's not going to be embarrassment. I think his best role is if you can get him and play him as a fourth outfielder, pinch hitter, that sort of role. But definitely wouldn't embarrass you out there. And he's a guy who's going to put the ball in play, and that can definitely be very helpful in certain situations. Next up in right field is Brian De La Cruz. He is 25, got a little bit of playing time for the Marlins last year. So he's another one who's on the older side, but he has the benefit of having a plus arm, so he can play right field very well. Also left. fake it in center if needed, but also can play first a little bit. Doesn't have a lot of range there, but enough to fill in. So worst case is he's a good bench player. His contact really good, especially against lefties. So excellent platoon bat. I mean, I think he's worth acquiring for that alone, knowing that you could spell 3 positions against lefties especially and really do well, and competent against righties too. 6 full years of control, like I said, with less than a year of service time. So another corner bat who I'd highly recommend, and I will probably be trying to acquire on Twitch. As a utility player, and a little bit of a bonus, Jackson Churio for Milwaukee. Not a ton of development, but he turns 18 and by the end of spring training. Surprisingly good eye and avoid Ks for his age. He can play, I would say fringe average center field. And the game says 50, which would be average, but practically speaking in the engine, 50 would be fringe average at best. You really want 60 plus as a center field rating. But yeah, the 60 range gives him enough to play all across the outfield. He also has a shortstop rating and 55 with a 50 in double play for his infield ratings. So he's someone who could pretty well work out as a 7-position utility guy at 6'1". Like I said, wouldn't be the very best first baseman, but once again, getting a guy who could be even more of a super sub than Ben Zobrist, really playing 7 positions competently, and have a guy who could spell for 70 to 100 games if you really wanted to take it to an extreme. Just needs that bat to develop a little bit to make it worth it at the corners, but definitely a really intriguing prospect. And yeah, 65 speed too, so even has potential as a pinch runner in certain situations. So really interesting player. Highly recommend him. Moving on to pitching, Chris Rodriguez was the starter who I was most interested in. So he starts off the year with being on the 60-day IL after shoulder surgery, and so you're not going to be able to trade for him, right away. Really, probably wouldn't be able to trade for him until the end of the year, unless you update the default settings that prevent injured players from being traded. But at 23, less than a year of service time, and that 70 movement is absolutely elite. Even with the control and stuff, if he doesn't have to strike out many guys, as long as you have a decent defense behind him, he'll be anywhere from an above average starter to I would say number 2 without any development. If you get a little bit of that talent change in the stuff, especially control, always helpful, but especially the stuff in this case, you could end up with an ace. So if you can just wait it out, aim to trade for him by the end of the year, and you could get a really good bargain. I don't know if the AI will let you, but it's worth a shot. For relievers, the most, I would say, borderline for prospect status would be Brett DeGrom, who has a full year of service time because he was a Rule 5 draft pick last year. And as you can see from these stats, didn't really excel in the majors, which isn't unexpected when your highest level was high A ball and then you missed 2020. But really talented, just filthy stuff from all the videos you'll watch on him. And if you listen to like John Daniels talk about why he was picked, because he has fantastic stuff. And you can see it in his potential in OOTP. Just 80 movement potential, absolutely insane. Actually has the potential for 3 pitches, although it's unlikely that he could be a starter unless you get really, really lucky with the stamina changes. But yeah, even getting to 50 control, he can be, a a fringe guy right off the bat, and if that stuff and or movement come through, he could be an actual legitimate stopper who just dominates out of the bullpen for, inning plus 2 inning stints at a time. So I think definitely a stealthy pick, and maybe not as sexy of a pick given that he's 24 and has a full year of service time, but I think a really high value one nonetheless. And then finally, as a bonus, Alec Burleson from the Cardinals organization. So he's currently in, it looks like he starts off at AA in game, although that could just be AI adjustment, but played some at AAA last year. Corner bat, mostly looks like right field, can also play first base, but really limited to that defensively. But 60 contact potential, still 23, so some room to develop, and just a little bit of room across the board, really. But what, of course, is most exciting is he could pitch. Now, his pitching ratings, they're rookie ball, low A level. He's not somebody who you can really put in and except in an emergency situation. Ideally, if you were, building a team and he made it to your bench as a bat, you could maybe call on him for some mop-up duty, but he's not someone who you really want to rely on unless you get really, lucky with that development. So could definitely use some work there, but his bat could have gotten him onto this list. He was just on the fringes of that, but you throw in the ability to pitch, makes an intriguing addition, and you're going to have to go out and trade for him if you're interested, though, because he doesn't have 3 years until he's Rule 5 eligible, so it'll be a while if you're waiting. So if you're going to go for it, go ahead and trade for him. But him and the other 11 looks like players, I think, could all help pretty much every organization in the game. Never hurts to have the depth. Plus, some of those guys can step in and improve a lot of teams already. So highly recommend taking a look at them, especially if you're a little bit further in the save. You may be able to find some of them have developed already, and you've gotten the high roll for their potential. So take a look at them. Let me know what you think, and if you have any other prospect suggestions who I overlooked or who have done really well on your save, and happy simming.